Anin Kinawea, Kahsenni Indigenous Sado Andonjaba, Mangan Dodam, Miigwechendam Mampiki Kiton. Hi everyone. My name is Kahsenni Nahwegahbow. I'm Wolf Clan, Anishinaabe and Nahwegahbow, and a member and citizen of Whitefish River First Nation with maternal roots in Kahnawake, Mohawk territory. Thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody, especially the organizers and our hosts. It's a really great privilege to be here among such brilliant company. And it's just a real gift to be here and share in this dialogue. An immense thank you to Gaitan and Kapwani. Your mind and heart and hands make the world feel rounder. And I'm just very grateful for this beautiful work that you've created that makes gatherings and conversations like this possible. So we can go to the first slide, please. Just to give some geographical context to the region I'll be talking about today, a lot of our knowledge is place-based. So this is just to give a very rough idea of where I come from as Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. This is the Great Lakes territory. And next slide, please. So I'm going to open my presentation today with a story. It's a well-known story from my territory, and it's called The Woman Who Married a Beaver. There is an Anishinaabe writer and scholar named Leanne Simpson who says that as Indigenous peoples, our bodies are made of stories and kinship and connections. Stories represent our continuance, and it's one of the reasons why we're still here, why I am here today, why I exist in spite of centuries of colonial violence in lands currently called Canada. And coming from an ethos of stories and continuance and of putting our elders first, I thought I would share a very old story that comes from Anishinaabe territory that has really helped me understand this constellation of connections that beads call to mind for me. So this is a story told by John Benesi, or Gagage Benesi, Forever Bird, who was an Anishinaabe chief from what is now called Fort William First Nation near Lake Superior, to an Indigenous fox anthropologist named William Jones in 1904. And it begins with a woman who goes on a long fast. Fasting is one of our very powerful ceremonial customs. And she meets someone who's in the form of a human being who invites her into his home. And she agrees and goes. And she sees how lovely his home is. It's very warm. He has lots of food. And she's very impressed with him. And they really get along, and he eventually asks her if she will become his partner, his life companion, and she agrees. And so the two of them go on to have a very beautiful life together. They have 4 children, they're happy, and their home is warm, and food and clothing and everything they could ever want is always plentiful. But the woman starts to notice that sometimes human beings come to visit their home, and sometimes her partner will leave their home for short periods of time. But he always returns with beautiful and useful gifts and presents, cherished belongings like tobacco, which is one of our medicines, clothing, kettles, plates, and knives. And she soon comes to realize that she's in a partnership with a beaver. And she realizes that when her beaver partner leaves their home, he leaves the spiritual realm where she currently resides now with him, and he enters into the physical realm of the human beings, the Anishinaabe, where he offers up his physical body to them in exchange for food, sustenance, and warmth. And in return, the humans gift these beaver beings or spirits gifts like tobacco and clothing, kettles, and knives, which the beaver then brings home from the human world to his family. So this is a reciprocal relationship, a respectful and a deeply meaningful international relationship between human beings and beaver nations. And at the end of her beaver partner's life, before he passes away, he tells his companion that humans will come to visit her soon after he passes away. They'll come to their lodge and that she should speak to them and she should return to the human world. So she's found by the human beings, and in re-entering that world, she shares her story about living with a beaver family and the kindness they showed her and how beautiful and rich her life was. And she reminds the human beings of how important their partnership with beavers is, to be mindful of their reciprocal responsibilities in this relationship. And of course, beavers were incredibly important for Indigenous lifeways in the Great Lakes at this time, and of course, into the fur trade era. And our survival really depended on maintaining this, the health of this relationship, and essentially this treaty with them. So this is a well-known story that is often shared, and it's important for many reasons, but why I wanted to share it today is because of how powerfully it articulates our own fundamental understandings of exchange and reciprocity and treaty and Anishinaabeg relationality with what we might call other than human or more than human beings or realms of power and spirit that animate our land and water and skyscapes. The next slide, please. One particularly interesting part of the story as it was told by Nahwegahbow, then translated into English, is this. When the woman is found by the human beings, she asks them to help her out of the beaver lodge. And so they create an opening where she emerges, and they describe her appearance in the following way. Out came the woman, very white was her head, and beautiful was the whole mystic cloth that she had for a skirt. Worked all over with beads was her cloak, and her moccasins too were very pretty. And her earrings she also had on. She was very handsomely arrayed. So from this description, it's clear that this woman was truly, a sight to behold. She's entering the human world from a different realm. And it's implied that she was very well cared for by her beaver kin, her relatives, when she lived there. And she's adorned with textiles and belongings, including beads, which means that these were items that were cherished mutually among both the Anishinaabe and deeply respected spirit beings. And what's interesting is in the original Anishinaabemowin version, because we come from an oral language and oral history, in the Anishinaabemowin version of the stories, it was told by Chief Benesi, the two words that really make this confluence of understandings of value between humans and the spirit world so potent are highlighted here in the text on the left. The first is Mnadoayan, which in English, in the English translation of the story, is the mystic cloth of the woman's skirt, and Mnedominens, which are the glass beads which fully embellish her shawl or the blanket that she wears. Next slide, please. In Anishinaabemowin, the root of both of these words comes from our language surrounding how we talk about spirit, or what we call Mnedo. Mnedoakan or Mnadoayan, when translated into English, literally means spirit skin, and more specifically, according to historical accounts and language speakers today, Mnedoayan was our word for a dark blue stroud, which was a high-quality trade cloth. And it's my understanding that we cherished the color blue for many possible reasons, some very likely cosmological, which I do hope we can discuss or touch on more throughout this symposium. And Mnedominens, which translates to little spirit berry or little spirit seed, words that very distinctly demonstrate the wonder and our love for these small, shiny materials. Berries or seeds, things that were nourishing and alive and that offered sustenance and were generative. I recently listened to a talk by Maureen Matthews from the Manitoba Museum, and she was talking about how beads and working with bead workers often talk to their beads. And she said, beads are willful, and they truly are. They do seem to kind of have a mind of their own sometimes. But so if we think about language really as a container for how human beings view the world, these words can really provide just a tiny glimpse into what these materials meant for Indigenous peoples at early sites of encounter. Both Mnadoayan and Mnedominens traveled to our territories as trade goods, European items that entered into our world that initially were not ours, but they became ours. We claimed and named them and applied and stitched them to some of our most cherished garments and belongings. Next slide, please. So while glass beads were new to Great Lakes Indigenous peoples, our relationship to beads and the use of materials for ornamentation extends across centuries and generations. According to George Hamill, reflective, bright, and white materials like crystal, shell, and native copper were of particular cultural significance as they were believed to share similar qualities with good, light-emitting substances like fire, the sun, and celestial bodies in the sky. So like these entities, reflective materials were thought to be imbued with warm and healthy and life-giving properties that brought about specifically peace and clarity of mind. And an example of this can be seen in the very early use of beads made by bright quahog shells, which were fashioned into wampum shell beads. Next slide. So strung together, these early shell beads represented a consciousness of peace, reciprocity, and a clear mind in woodland ceremonial contexts. And because these beads embodied these principles, they were often woven into belts, which recorded significant agreements, alliances, and treaties of friendship and diplomacy between peoples and nations. And so here are two examples of early agreements. The one on the left between Indigenous nations, referred to as the dish with one spoon, and on the right, forged between Indigenous nations and European peoples, called the Covenant Chain or the Treaty of Niagara. Next slide. So several scholars have written about the cultural translation that occurred, or what might be called the indigenization of European trade materials as they were incorporated into Indigenous visual language systems. Glass beads in particular, they possessed shiny and reflective qualities similar to iridescent articles that I mentioned, like native copper and wampum shell, as well as other highly valued materials that were already commonly in use by Indigenous makers at the time of contact. And as Rick Hill has stated quite frankly, for makers, having access to new media and sewing implements, it really just made things a lot easier. And it allowed them to further artistic and creative freedom to express their skill in innovative and strategic ways during a particularly dark time in our history. So here on the left are two very old bags made of land-based materials, and on the right, a later bandolier bag made of glass beads. So of course, with the influx of new people and new media also came a great amount of upheaval for Indigenous peoples in the Great Lakes, who, particularly during the late 19th to early 20th centuries, lived through what must have seemed like an almost apocalyptic reality. Missionaries and other assimilationist initiatives forced ceremonial practices underground, and European settlement, the reserve system, the government legislation impacting our ability to rely on land-based practices like hunting and fishing for our livelihoods. We also had less access to things like animal hide and porcupine quills. And while the activities of Indigenous women are often left out of the written or archival record related to trade, they were actually major players in the economy, and they set demand and showed preferences, particularly for certain types of fabrics and most certainly beads. Next slide. Early explorers and travelers often, when they visited Great Lakes territory, they would write about how Indigenous groups marveled at trinkets and baubles and beads, perhaps finding our love for them silly or frivolous. And while indeed they were trade items that came from elsewhere, these new materials that entered into our world were very likely valued for their similarity to Indigenous substances that were already in use. Shiny substances of shell, crystal, and copper that we understood to be connected with principles of peace, blessings, and what's called the good mind. And in looking back to the story of the woman who married a beaver, beads also ornamented the garments of beings in the spirit world who we deeply cherished. We applied beads to belongings that we deeply cared for. Here on the left, they're inlaid, forming the eyes of a figurative pipe bowl, recalling again the principles of clear-sightedness and peace that would be affiliated with pipe smoking ceremonies. And on the right, they are lovingly applied to a cradle board, which would carry and protect arguably some of our most deeply treasured and important people in our communities, our babies and young people. In most cases, beads or mnedominens, little spirit berries, are life-giving, and they're applied to our belongings to seek blessings from our relations in the more than human realm. Next slide. And of course, as well as our use of beads on items for our own use, they also played a major part in what we created for the tourist or the curio trade. So during the 19th and early 20th centuries, when we could no longer rely on hunting and fishing to survive, at the same time, there was a tourist boom to the wilds of North America that was occurring, and Indigenous peoples began to engage in the making of souvenirs, where a primary market was Victorian ladies who were visiting locations surrounding the Great Lakes region and who wanted to take home a piece of Canada with them. And often they were searching for things for their homes. So at this time, we see a really beautiful array of domestic items that are being made by Indigenous makers. So this is a beaded table cover that would have been made for the tourist trade. And here I just find it so fitting that it is a table cover, particularly during a time when this beadwork of the tourist trade is literally what fed Indigenous families and what put food on our tables and kept a roof over our head. It was the beadwork that was happening at Indigenous kitchen tables with medominans, little spirit berries, imbued with life-giving qualities that fed and nourished us both physically and spiritually. And I think I will end it there. Kachimikach, Nahwegahbow.